Welcome to the session today. First, we want to acknowledge that we recognize that racism in America has a long-standing history and it has taken many forms over the years. The purpose of this discussion is to start a conversation about the role of the social work profession in racism in America. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can and have a discussion that leads us into fruitful, activities for the future. But we know that we won't be able to definitively answer, a lot of questions pertaining to race. We also recognize that discussing race in America has been and continues to be very difficult for the discussion to maximize its full potential. We ask that everybody, just be respectful. So with that being said, we will move into introductions. I'll start first. My name is Virgil Gregory. I am an associate professor at the Indiana University School of Social Work. I teach a lot of practice courses about addiction and mental health. My research focuses on the role of cognitive behavioral therapy in opioid and affective disorders, as well as persons of African descent. So with that being said, I guess we'll move to our other panel members.
Thank you, Virgil, for that opening. And I'm Gary Bailey. I'm the Assistant Dean for Community Engagement and Social Justice at Simmons University in Boston, Massachusetts, where I also have the pleasure of being an advisor to the Office of the President, President Lynn Perry Wooten, as an advisor around areas of diversity that affect the university. My faculty appointment is in the School of Social Work, and as well as in our School of Nursing and Health Sciences. I have been at Simmons now going on my 22nd year, former president of NASW National and the International Federation of Social Workers. And I have been Black for my entire life. And so the journey of being a Black man in America is not something that I've learned from a textbook, it's something I've learned from life.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Hobdy, and I am the Vice President of Ethics, Diversity, and Inclusion for the National Association of Social Workers, and just took on that role at the beginning of this year. Prior to that, I served as a Director of Ethics, but NASW made a commitment to enhance its diversity and inclusion efforts, and thus appointing me to serve as the Vice President of Ethics, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'm really proud of them for that. I also serve as the Ethics Commissioner for the International Federation of Social Workers. And I'm a proud graduate of Howard University School of Social Work. And so I've come into this field with that Black perspective. And I really love what Gary shared. I've also been a Black woman all of my life, and so as well. So thank you for having me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you to my esteemed panel colleagues. My name is Carol Hostetter. I'm a professor of social work at Indiana University. I direct the undergraduate program on the Bloomington campus, and I teach bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D. students. I'm really happy to be included in this conversation. I earned my MSW in 1977, a little while ago, and practiced mental health therapy for about 20 years, then went back to school for my Ph.D. in sociology. I've been an academic now for about 20 years. My goal is to be a part of the conversation that helps our society reach a solution to racism and the other isms that come along with it. I am very aware that I have a lot to learn, and while I have some things to say today, I am mostly here to listen.
So, in accordance with the purpose for our panel discussion today, we've thought about and we have some questions for you. The first question is, why does a profession which strives to create social and economic equality for all lack racial and gender diversity?
It's interesting. I think the challenge is that is a lack of awareness of history. So let's really think about the ways in which Blacks or BIPOC or African Americans or enslaved Africans were denied access to education. So first, you can't go and get the credentials if you don't have access to the kind of education that those credentials require. Education as we know it in this day and age is a very expensive undertaking still. So access determines who is at the table and who gets to participate. But this is a cumulative issue. Also, our profession was founded by the illustrative Jane Addams and Mary Richmond. We don't talk about that they were people of their times. These were not the most inclusive, enlightened women when it came to issues of race. You know, they were part of a movement that was highly segregated. The models that they created were segregated. And so our profession has been segregated, and it's also been used as a weapon in communities of color. So social work as a weapon is also something that we need to take into account in terms of it was not necessarily the kind of profession that a young, let me talk about this young Black person. It was not the profession my parents dreamed of me to go into, not because it wasn't a good profession, but because it was tainted in our community in many ways. And so it really took a shifting of what social work meant for them to know that I wasn't going in looking for telephones in people's homes. I wasn't out to destroy the community. I was not out to disrupt families. I was not out to basically come in and be an agent of the state to continue to destroy or continue to maintain the 400-year cycle of destroying Black families. So I think that's part of the challenge.
We are not a perfect perfection, and we're part of a system that was not created for us to, you know, to even understand what racism is or how it affects our work. I mean, it wasn't built that way. It wasn't built by people who understood that. And so even though I think we've made strides for sure as a profession, this is a shift. What we're seeing right now, having the conversations the way that we're having, being intentional about them, digging deep. This is the first time in my social work career that I've ever had these kind of discussions be something that's spread around the social work community. So I think we're just all realizing, honestly, just realizing how far we haven't come in these issues. I think we've been misled. I think we've had misconceptions, ideas about who we really are. And now it's just coming to light that, you know, I do think that for the most part, social workers come into this field with the right intentions, but not being aware of our history has been a disservice for us. It has not contributed to us being an anti-racist profession, and we're just starting to do the work that we need to do.
As a white cisgender female, I am part of the group that dominates social work. And I think it's really important for me and for people who look like me to ask ourselves, why did I become a social worker? For me, back in 1977, I wanted meaningful work. I wanted to deal with problems, with things that were real and things that mattered in life. That's all good. But I'm an example of white saviorism. In my therapy practice, I helped individuals and I felt good. But I wasn't dealing with the source of those problems. I have benefited in huge part from affirmative action in which the point of it was to equal the playing field. Well, it really benefited white women more than Black, brown, indigenous people of color. So I think there are a lot of us like me, and a lot of us have to come to a reckoning of, why did I get into this, and how can I contribute differently? Because maybe my intentions were good, but my impact was not always good.
If I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, what would you say are some of the consequences of maybe people coming to the profession for the wrong reasons, or you know, if you could say a little bit more about what are the consequences of those issues you just described?
Well, we talk about empowerment and we talk about resilience. So we help our clients be resilient rather than changing what they need to be resilient to. I'm sure Don and Gary can add to that.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting when you talked about why you came into social work, and I think about um, you know, people who look like me when I talk to Black and brown social workers about why they came into this field, and the reasons are different. It's kind of because they were a part of those systems, those racist systems where they were snatched out or told to be resilient or made to believe these things about themselves, and they wanted to be a part of the change and not understanding the systems that were in place around social work. So I think it's just interesting that why we went into it, what we found when we arrived, and how those things impacted how we've been able to contribute or not. You know, you hear social workers talk about now lack of leadership opportunities in the profession, lack of, you know, being able to change systems and policies that we now realize have been harmful to us. And even us realizing that, I think a lot of us have not been aware of the impact of these systems and how we have been trained to go out and do social work. Again, not being aware of that history and not being aware of the harm that we've caused our own communities, just wanting to be a part of doing something good, you know? So having these discussions about our real history has just been extremely helpful to all of us.
It's interesting that you said that, Dawn, and also I want to say that I appreciate Carol getting us started in this piece of this conversation, because I would recommend to anybody out here that you read White Rage by Dr. Carol Anderson. It is an amazing book. I mean, my whole summer has been being immersed in the canon of critical race literature, the Ibram Kendi's, Carol Anderson's, Isabel Wilkerson's. I've even going back to read Du Bois, Baldwin, et cetera. So my head is kind of imploding and exploding. And I do embrace what Baldwin says to you know, and I'm paraphrasing, to not be angry in Black in America is just not possible when you really look at what's happened in this country. And yes, the ways in which the system has been set up in many ways has been to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's the assimilationist Booker T. Washington model that if we would just be better, then we would be treated better. So if we would dress for success, behave for success, so if we assimilate, that we will be successful. Then you add to that what it means to be an Ida B. Wells, a social work pioneer, who was one of the first anti-racists. No, I am who I am, and I'm going to challenge the things that are impacting and affecting my community and use my power to bear witness to what's happening. And we have to really look at misogynoir that affected her as a Black woman, and what that meant, the sense of isolation for within group and outer group. And so my point of all of this is that this has been so complex for so long, and we keep talking about all of it as if it is a one-off. It's person to person versus person to system. And I am struck by the fact that as I look in my classes teaching social policy, how many of my students don't want to do policy, they want to get in there and work with the client. And I keep thinking that if I don't hold them there, the harm I'm doing to communities who are nothing but system rigged. And it's not about moving the pieces, it's about disrupting the systems. And so many new professional social workers and longtime social workers don't have a clue how to disrupt, how to be good trouble, in the words of the late John Lewis, how to be good trouble. And that's really what makes change. We would not be having this moment if people hadn't taken to the streets and some people breaking a window. America responds to violence. That is its language. That is its language. It's the only language it listens to is power, and violence equals power. So I think that's a whole lots of other conversations, but it is about systems and understanding how those systems are structured and in place, be it caste or class, and they're meant to undergird and keep things the way that they are. And we keep moving the pieces, but not taking on the system.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Gary. I have the opportunity to teach gerontology for Howard University as an adjunct professor, and I teach social gerontology 1, which is the biological, psychological, and social aspects of aging. But I also teach gerontology 1, which starts tonight, and that is about policies, programs. And I remember even myself being reluctant, like, not really understanding why it's important to study them. And even now for my students, they come in with this resistance, not understanding why it's important to understand policies and programs. But when they leave, just understanding the connections between policies and programs and systems, and how important it is for anyone who's doing any type of direct practice to really understand the system. You can't really help your clients unless you understand the systems and how to fight those systems with your clients. And with is important as well, that that you educate your clients about these systems and that you empower them to fight for themselves as well. But it's really important to understand the system, and by the systems I mean the historically racist systems that impact how we work with clients individually. So I appreciate you stating that.
What specific changes should be made in the social work profession to increase racial representation?
To increase racial representation?
Or we could say of our students or of our work practitioners.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, I start from a simple place is that, it has to be intentional. It has to be, we can talk the talk or we can walk the walk. And if you're walking the walk, it has to be intentional. And that's starting from the beginning, really going back and understanding our history, where we might have made errors, what we actually need to do now. I really appreciate I had a conversation with Gary, and it's kind of stuck with Dr. Bailey, and it stuck with me when you mentioned about right now we hear from our white colleagues and allies the interest in kind of recognizing that we have a problem and then moving on and trying to fix it versus sitting in it, and I think part of the way that we move forward is taking time, breathing in this space, really having a full understanding so that we can articulate the way Carol just did. Articulate a clear understanding of where we've been, how we've gotten here, and then talk about how we move forward. So for me, the conversations we're having right now across the board are critical. People get tired of talking, but these conversations are so critical. We won't understand each other, where we've come from, our different perspectives, unless we have the conversations. So I think that's a critical piece. And then again, being intentional, finding the experts and doing some real work about what steps we need to take to move forward. A lot of people have a lot of opinions, but I think being strategic and intentional about that is a way to start.
I couldn't agree more, Dawn. And I think that it's the intentionality of any systems change. If you want to increase numbers, then you really do have to look at recruitment and you have to look at retention. What's getting in the way of retention? People look at who's coming in the door, but not why they're leaving. Because why people are leaving tells us something about who we are that we don't want to face. As a trained social work clinician, I too got my degree went to graduate school in '77. So it was a different training as well. So, and I think that's also very important. When you were trained, imprints you. We were a little more activists in the coming out of the late '60s, '70s, so that I look at every moment as something to change. Versus having grown up acquiescing. And so I think it's a different generational fit. But I do believe that we have the intentionality, that we have to be committed to doing the self-work and staying in that space. I hear lots of people wanting a roadmap. Tell me how to be anti-racist. Well, what you just told me 3 months ago was that you didn't even know that you were racist. So how do you get to being anti-racist if you don't sit for the next 3 years? And Resma Menachem says that white folks need to sit for 3 to 10 years in that stuff by themselves, having conversations with each other about how do they fix this thing that they created. And that the output is very often to want to bring a person of color, a Black Indigenous person of color, in to fix it. It's not ours. We didn't make this mess. And so sitting with that, I think, is a challenge. And the parallel to doing clinical work is the same. Our clients will come in, have one session and say, oh, that's it, I don't have to come back anymore. You really helped me today. We call that flight and health when I was a student, because you just touched enough to make them think, I don't want to come back here, but I feel better now. And it's in that moment in this is a 400-year journey. It's not going to happen overnight. We can learn how not to continue to contribute to it, but we have to sit with the ramifications of what's been done. And our training, our educational systems have to change. We are not doing what we need to do to help people to understand what needs to, we're not training the students of tomorrow. And I hope we can talk about that as well.
As far as the question regarding what specific changes we should make in the social work profession, I recall that I started off as a biology major, and I told them, well, as an undergrad, I told them I'm going to switch my major to psychology. They said, oh, don't you do that. You won't make any money. So I bring that up just to say that there are a couple of different methods. I think one is direct, where we kind of go out and we recruit. So we could go to predominantly Black high schools or other institutions and recruit and tell them about the social work profession, dispel any myths, tell them where we are currently and where we want to be in the future and the role that they have in that transition. And then also, in many of our communities, some of us are the first members to go to graduate school. And what we get as students in the course, it goes out into our communities. So I think we should explicitly address race in the curriculum to the extent that it's possible, and it's not difficult to do. I think we should connect those with different council and social work education accreditation standards. And we just need to be, like Dr. Bailey was saying earlier, we just need to be explicit about our intention to recruit and maintain Black and other racial minorities in the social work profession. I think, Dr. Hostetter, I think you're about to say something.
So I've been studying barriers, academic barriers, for a while, and I've seen a lot of academic policies and procedures that create barriers before even entering a university. Things like complicated application forms. Have you ever completed something online and you left one thing out and you had to do the whole thing over? The studies show that students who are first generation are very discouraged by those kinds of barriers. And things like multiple reference letter requirements, application fees, these are all barriers to start with. And then once you get in, to have a complicated pathway to graduation without good personal advising with an advisor that cares about you, that creates barriers. And if students can't graduate in 4 years, generally they never do graduate.
Right.
And then faculty, once you're in the classroom, faculty who have a fixed mindset, Carol Dweck wrote about fixed versus growth mindset. I've had students tell me that some faculty at Indiana University will say the first day of class, look to your left, look to your right. A lot of the people you see won't be here next year.
Right, right.
And that's giving them a message that there's a high chance they're not going to make it. And instead, you can give a message, everyone here can make it. You got here, you can get through. You might have to work harder in some classes than others, but you can do it. And maybe give an example of yourself and something you had to work at. And that helps overcome stereotype threats. Then there are these negative stereotypes in our culture that the individual themselves doesn't have to believe, but if they think the professor believes it, then that really affects their physiology and their performance on exams and assignments. And then let's say they get into social work classes and then we put up these barriers in pursuit of, quote, rigor. I still don't know what rigor means. I've asked like 5 colleagues, I've gotten 5 definitions, none of which make any sense. I think it's code for barrier, right?
Right.
So yes, good writing is crucial, but let's focus on writing that's clear and respectful and honest, not making people jump through the latest APA hoops. And then we need to decolonize the reading,
yes.
look at Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color who've contributed to social change historically and currently. We need to make the classroom a brave space rather than a safe space. A safe space serves the dominant group,
Right.
the white
That's
student,
right. That's right.
to keep
Yes.
them feeling
Yes.
comfortable. Yes,
Yes.
and if we have a brave space, then we're challenging white students to examine their white identity and to embrace cultural humility. I will never be culturally competent. I will never.
Yeah.
I need to own my own lack of knowledge and my own openness to growth. I can't, if I already know it, I can't learn it.
Yeah.
So those are some of the barriers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I just want to add that from a diversity and inclusion perspective. I really appreciate that. And as you were speaking, I'm thinking about some of the other things that we can do specifically. And this is for faculty and students. And one of the things I'm hearing now is that some of these things we've never even named. Some of the things that create spaces that lack diversity and inclusion and anti-racist is because we've experienced things. We've been a part of contributing to things without even knowing what they are. And so now when we're talking about naming what microaggressions are, what they feel like for the person that's putting it out there and what it feels like for the person that's experiencing it, really spending time in the classroom. And again, this is teaching faculty and staff and administrators about what these things really mean to people, naming them, calling them out. And then again, like you said, creating that brave, I like that word, space where we can really talk about these experiences is really important. Another important piece is the reaching out to the students you're trying to serve. Some of our institutions are still working from this perspective of what it was like in the 70s when Gary went to school, or the 90s when I went to school. And I think we're really missing the conversation with the younger students that we're trying to serve. Having conversations with them about what education looks like for them. What are the things that are challenging for them today, not what we understood it was 20 years ago, and still using that to guide how we teach. Having the conversations with the people you're trying to assist and making sure they're included and that they're engaged in the conversation and shaping their own education experiences, I think it's something that we haven't done, and I really think it would impact a positive experience for those and a success rate.
You made me think, Carol and Dawn. I love the concept of brave space. That is a reframing in a positive way. The same way that I believe that we need to reframe and rethink resilience. If we're going to talk about race in America, Black people have been punished for being resilient. It's almost as if the goal has been to whoop the resilience and the resolve out of us over generations, because that's what makes so many historically, and Du Bois has said this, people kept going back regardless, still being hopeful, which then made the blowback. So let's reframe what we talk about when we talk about resiliency and race, and what that means. The language that we use as a profession, I refer to families who are functioning in a dysfunctional world. Because dysfunctional families, it's not the families, it's the world around them that's creating the chaos. They're doing the best they can. And so thinking about that language, but also the ways in which we as a system, as an educational system, higher ed was not meant for people who were not white, male, and privileged. And everybody who came into it was supposed to be grateful that you got a seat at the table. That's why HBCUs exist. That's why women's-centered schools like mine exist. There was not space at those other tables for those populations. And so rigor can become another measure. It's like a poll tax. It's like it's like having to read the Constitution. It becomes another way to say that people don't belong. We see this in PhD programs all the time in terms of what constitutes good scholarship. We see this in the tensions between, I'm a community-based participatory researcher. I need the voice of the community driving my work and hearing sometimes, well, that's really not scientific research, or you're told you're a social scientist versus a real scientist. Or as a friend of mine was told when she was doing her doctoral work, she wanted to do her dissertation on some aspect of what it means to be Jamaican. And she went to a highly reputable Ph.D. program. And her dissertation chair said, well, who's going to be interested in that as research? And she said, Jamaicans will be. And the teacher had no sense of Jamaica or the Jamaican diaspora. Nothing about the diaspora. That Jamaicans are everywhere. And so the privilege and arrogance could have shut down a less strong person to not go out and be a phenomenal scholar and academic from their lens of what constituted rigor and privilege. So we have our work to do as a profession. We really do.
You know, I'll go ahead and say one final thing too. With the same intention of going out and recruiting students, I would also say, as somebody who's got an MSW and a Ph.D. in social work, I can count on one hand the number of Black faculty I've had. So I think we should make an equal and concerted effort in getting and retaining Black faculty.
Mm.
If we're going to discuss a lot more moving forward, but unless anybody has anything else as far as
Virgil, and I'm sorry, it's a quick question because you just said something I think is important. One of the things that I do with my students is, and I teach graduate students and medical students as well, and it's always interesting. I need to, in the first class, ask them, have they ever had a Black professor, a Black male professor? Because in effect, what we have to unpack is power. I have power in this space, and I wield it. I'm not afraid of using it, and have it to help you, but we need to unpack all the messaging that you've had, or at least get it up front that you've been given some messages about what this means. And I can see the testing of the microaggressions that come towards Black faculty, of students who want to challenge and who want to, last semester I had a student who had misread the syllabus, but wanted to correct me in front of my class and run up with the syllabus in hand to correct me in front of the students because, and basically what I said is, you know, A, you need to sit down, don't do that again. 2, let's talk about how disrespectful that is. And 3, it's your error.
Right.
The choice was, do I create a space that makes her feel safe, or do I create a space that makes me feel brave? and so I don't play that out for 14 weeks and let it build in a way that then becomes implicit and unconscious.
Yeah.
So we had to name it in the space, own it, and model for the other students. This is what it felt like to me.
Gary, I must tell you that from teaching over the years, I've told myself that now that is the stance that I'm going to take. I'm just going to say, you know, let's just talk about race, and just for your thoughts and your consequent feelings about, you know, what it means to have a Black man as the professor. What's your comfort level? And it's not through any formal instruction, but that's just through my experience that told me that this is something that I need to do at the beginning of courses, which
we can't
right now. So I have to.
If we can't name the obvious, how can the students?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I took that approach just starting at Howard, and it was more about my personality than being conscious of it. And setting the standard in terms of what the expectation is in the classroom. And I think it's so interesting, again, starting teaching as a Black woman and also a younger Black female professor. It's been interesting in terms of those staying challenging, been challenged in different ways by my white students and my Black female students and my male students in all different ways. But I've had to constantly, every semester, set the standard from the beginning about how we're going to treat each other, what the expectations are, how you will approach me, what you can expect from me. So it's interesting that you share that. That's definitely been my experience. And again, very different from flirting with my male students and thinking it's okay to call me by my first name, to calling me, yeah, girl, you know, from my female students, and even to just challenging me, you know, from other students, again, when they haven't done their research. So that's really interesting that you share that. I've had similar experiences. But I set the standard from the very first class and make sure that we don't have to do that for the full semester.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess this kind of leads to our next question. What specific changes should be made in the social work profession to improve the lives of the racial minorities that we'll be working with? If we've already covered it, you know, and you just want to say something in addition to what you've already said, please feel free.
For me, one thing is to stop referring to people as minorities, because the majority is here. And that the way in which we use language really is powerful. And I think that the shifting of that language is going to be, because that's the drumbeat underneath a lot of the madness that we're seeing around race right now, is that there are white folks who get that this is shifting. And you know, you're seeing all the desperation to try to stop something that's not stoppable, which is the shift in who represents the face of the nation. And I should say some white people, but unless you disclaim it, then I'm going to say that you also own it. So I need a conscious disclaimer for these sorts of things. And so that's very important. It's also the ways in which we look at what counts as knowledge. We do not count knowledge in a way that says that someone who's been out in the community having success for 20 years but never had the option of getting a bachelor's degree or associate's degree could probably be one of the best social work students that you've ever seen. They need a chance to get in that door, and they don't have the time to go through that linear process in the same way. Does everyone need a degree to do the work? Some of the work that we're doing, and to really begin to think about, if we think about substance abuse work, at least when I ran a substance abuse clinic, it was that peer-to-peer work that was the most important. You know, that you needed someone who understood your journey, who could be there for you to do that kind of work. And we don't value that in the same way that we value the, it used to be a bachelor's degree was enough, then it had to be a master's degree. Now you almost have to have a Ph.D. to talk. So we're credentialing ourselves and we're licensing ourselves into oblivion. So I think all of these things are things that the National Association of Black Social Workers had warned about a long time ago. They were not the great supporters of licensing because they could predict what was going to happen, who was going to be in and who was going to be out, who was going to be welcomed in the tent and who was not, whose credentials, whose work was not going to be valued and whose work was not. So I think that there are opportunities to rethink how we deliver our services, but also to really think about what we privilege as success, important training, knowledge, skills. What would it mean to our programs to have someone with a felony? What does that question mean on our applications? I understand the question in terms of government funding, but do I need to know when you're coming into my program if you're a felon? And does that turn off someone who's served their time but has something that they could offer? So I could go on and on and on.
And I think I share my thoughts. I think it really is about engaging the students who are the future of social work and shaping their experience. And it kind of covers the things that Gary talked about. What does social work look like for them? How do they want to contribute to the world? And is it already captured in our education systems? Are we missing things? Are we missing opportunities? Are we missing ways of engaging and retaining? I think we have to talk to the people we're trying to serve, the people we're trying to prepare to be social workers, and find out everything from how they learn, the differences in what technology means to them in their learning experiences and opportunities. Right now, there are a lot of radical social workers that are really about fighting for racial and social justice, and they're realizing what they didn't learn in school. So we really have to reshape what they're learning, how they're learning, and not underestimate their own current knowledge, and experiences, and how those things will shape the best social workers that we can have. And I agree, they're reshaping it. It's if you're going to have a membership organization, you're going to have to make sure that you're thinking about what their needs are, bringing them to the table so that they have the experience that they want, or they're going to create their own. And that's fine too. That's fine too. But what is our role in terms of sharing our wisdom, as well as opening ourselves up to hearing what their needs and true desires and experiences are, and use all of that to shape the future of social work? Something that NASW is going through right now. And I'm glad. It's challenging, it's humbling, but it's extremely important. And I'm really glad that we're in this space, as challenging as it is sometimes, but really taking the time to talk to who the future social workers are and what does social work mean to them. Are we capturing it for them? Are we providing resources and opportunities that will make them the social workers that they need to be for the future?
I'll add that I spent the majority of my practice in health and substance use, providing mental health and substance use treatment. I had a lot of clients that were not white, and I worked with a high Medicaid population. So I would add, so I can think of retrospectively in my career of different things when I focused on individual interventions, when I should have came out a little bit more and focused more on systemic issues. My response to that question would be, I think we should advocate for policies that address structural racism. And in our advocacy, to have a research base to support it. I also think we need a qualitative component where we don't just have numbers to support it, but we also have the articulated experiences of Black and Brown people. And I think we should also, in advocating for these different policies that address structural racism, we should make it explicitly clear how it relates to the social work code of values and ethics.
Gary mentioned earlier Resma Menakem, and he does wonderful work with helping people see the intergenerational transfer of trauma that racism causes for families, and just the daily effects of micro and not so micro aggressions, and so how the body keeps the score, and how therapists, so if you are a therapist, if you are in practice, looking at how we do retain that stress in our bodies and how we can release them. I also think about, there's an author named Dawes, D-A-W-E-S, I don't remember his first name. He recently wrote a letter to white therapists. And in my career, as I said, getting my MSW in 1977, we didn't know anything about so much. PTSD wasn't a thing. I was never taught anything about sexual abuse, about substance use disorders. I had to learn all that. And I eventually we all learned to ask clients about their using, ask clients about their trauma. Were you physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused? Are you in a relationship now where, partner violence? So we learned to ask those questions, but we never have learned, I don't think, what Dawes is saying, to ask a client who's Black or Brown, what is the effect of racism on your life? I just read that in July, and I'm blown away. And I was teaching a class, I shared it with my students. How do I not know this? And it's my fault. It's not Dawes's fault that he didn't write this 20 years ago. Right. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot we can change in our practice.
Yeah.
And then, of course, looking at policies. And I know we have a question similar to this later, so I'll say more about this later. But just whatever we're interested in, looking at housing or food, and looking at the policies where we're gatekeepers. How am I a gatekeeper? And how do I give people access to resources in this situation and not in that situation? How can I change that?
I like you talking about that. I've been thinking about the experience of white therapists, and especially those who serve Black and Brown and Indigenous people, and how many of them have been given the opportunity to ask themselves about who they are and how they show up in that work. From, am I a racist, and not, haven't been asked that question, haven't been put in a place where I need to question myself. And if not, where am I? Am I at the place of actually being an anti-racist? And how does that impact how I serve my clients? And I think that's another piece of social therapists are looking at themselves to see who they are and how has that impacted how they provided their services, what they've told people about themselves, how they've helped people in their own helping and healing process. And I've heard some therapists talk about, like, I've never even thought about what role have I been playing in terms of perpetuating racism and racist ideas, some consciously and some unconsciously, So there's so many great spaces and opportunities for all of us to do some self-evaluation, talk to ourselves, talk to trusted colleagues, to figure out how many of these things we share, and then figuring out where do we go from here. So I appreciate you sharing that. Mm-hmm.
Once you have somebody they're open to the idea of examining their own biases or beliefs about race. What do you do with it if it's contrary to what
That's a good question. That's a great question. And I don't, I have the answer that we're using, but I really think that it's just a great question. And I like that we started this off with, these are great questions. Sometimes we might not have all the answers here, but I think one of the is going back to some of our basics, like starting with something like our code of ethics, right? This is the time we all need to go back and review our code of ethics, really think about why we got into social work, what our ethical responsibilities are. I'm finding that we're seeing a lot of social workers are struggling with being responsible, with understanding our responsibility to promote social justice, all of the different things that our code says. And so we're asking folks to go back, read your code, recommit to ethical social work practice. It's a great foundation because our code is that we promote social justice and that we fight against anti-racism, even if it doesn't use those words. But then looking at all of the things that we have in place that guide the profession and going back and looking at them again and look at the language and see where we need to make improvements. Someone mentioned right now that the word anti-racism is not in the code of ethics. Do we need to add that language? Does it currently describe anti-racism without using the word? But all of our standards, our curriculums, really an opportunity to go back and look at what is there that's guiding us. So that's one of the things I've been thinking about.
It's an exciting opportunity when we think about our cultural competency standards that were reviewed, that added language about intersectionality and cultural humility. This is very dynamic, though it is not as dynamic work as one would think, because some of this language, anti-racist, has been around for a very long time. And so it's the way in which things come into our lexicon and move out of. It's the language of sociology. That's where the language of Du Bois. That's all Du Bois. Well, Du Bois went through his own trajectory as well, from being upstanding to an assimilationist to then being anti-racist as well. So it really describes, if Du Bois can be dynamic and evolutionary, then we all can be. Right? So that we start in different places and move in different ways along the path. I think our code is the most important guide post that we have. The flip side for me has always been, and I say this as a former president of the profession, one of the responsibilities of the president would be when letters would come and judgments would be made about someone being suspended or being censored, and I would sign those letters. I took very seriously that I was impacting someone's ability because it was reported to the licensing board. So that's important that you sign that letter. And I would sign it with a pen that was only used for that because of the significance of what I was doing. I wanted it documented. But I also would be struck sometimes by what went into people's thinking that put them in positions to make decisions that they make. And so what does it mean for someone to say something that they say is a joke, but is really a racist comment to a colleague, and then to laugh it off by saying I didn't mean anything, or to be able to say, oh, I'm sorry, me bad, it was a joke, as if that stops the clock on the effect on the person who heard it. And is that professional conduct? And what happens with that, with professional conduct? If you think that's a joke, what does that mean about what you're saying to other clients, or the ways in which people describe clients when they're, the way in which we enshrine what constitutes poverty, a poor neighborhood, it becomes a placeholder for race without unpacking why that neighborhood might be poor, which is a more powerful discussion to have, an economically disenfranchised. When we talk about child welfare without talking about the ways in which the child welfare system, the models that we look at with the Native Child Welfare Act, and removing Native children from their families, removing slave children from their families, not allowing Chinese individuals to bring their families over, so removing them from their families. Why are we surprised that we're still removing kids from their families and putting them in cages? We've been doing it since the inception of the nation. And we have been involved in it. We were front and center we're complicit. We were part of what was considered good science, which was eugenics. We participated as a profession in the sterilization of women. We made judgments about people's, if someone was promiscuous, whether or not they needed to be sterilized. But we looked at promiscuity as a race-based piece. I was struck by a piece on NPR that looked at eugenics, and they were going to pay reparations to people who had been sterilized. And what was really interesting was listening to a social worker. They interviewed a social worker who said, I still don't think I did anything wrong participating in that.
Wow.
That's a problem.
Wow. Yeah.
It's shocking. And then we look at the carceral system, and everybody thinks, oh, put a social worker in the police department and that's going to change everything. But we have been complicit in the carceral system in every step of the way. Right. And if we are a part of that system, we're not going to be able to change that from within. We need to dismantle that. And we need to not put up with those calls to make the police department look better.
Okay, so I know I started off at the very beginning, and everybody recalls that I said that we're not going to have all the answers to all the questions. But it just kind of begs the question. I think it's worth discussing. As a profession, how do we go about the dismantlement of police brutality and things of that nature?
I think we need to own it first. Right. I think we need to say, I'm racist. I have done racist things. We need to, examine that. And maybe every now and then I'm anti-racist. But, we need to own it first, and we need to examine. I mean, I think Dawn said, sit in it. White people need to sit in it and sit in what we have done. That's just a start.
Yeah, and I don't know that we have the answers, and I'll try to get to some form of an answer, but I know one of the challenges that I'm seeing, even within the professional association, this is all the full association, all the chapters around the states, is that there is actually inconsistency within our own profession about where we stand on that issue. And that's challenging when you're, kind of fighting and having misunderstandings and disagreements about what it means to dismantle. So one is the language and defining what that means, because it has different meanings for many of us. And then what is in it? What is the profession's responsibility and role in this? What role have we played? So I'm finding it really challenging to move forward, because we have different ideas and beliefs around how we got here and what our role has been, leading up until this point. And now there's a lot of challenges. I get the concept, but I know for me, some of the things that I think about are Again, I get the concept, and we know we're powerful. We have a lot of skills and knowledge that are useful. But it's another example. One of the things I've heard, and I really understand it, is putting ourselves in another position where we might be overburdening ourselves. We're not providing the training that's necessary. We're not providing the protections that might be necessary. We're not addressing racism in the police force. So that Black social workers who's being asked to go out with a police officer and not having had the opportunity to address their own fear of police, and working with the person that they might be working with around those fears before they're teamed up. You know, there's so many different levels and layers to this that I think it's just really challenging to get anywhere. Yeah, those are my thoughts. I don't really have the answer.
Yeah, and I agree with both Carol and with Dawn. I think that this is a very complex issue, and we're not dealing with officer friendly who used to walk the beat. I haven't seen a policeman walk a beat in forever. I don't even know what that looks like anymore. And you used to know who your neighborhood policeman was, who could help you if you got locked out, and they were community. It was a very different, it doesn't mean they were all great, but you at least knew who was out there to not necessarily control you, but the appearance was to help you on a certain level. We're now in a place where it's the militarization of the police, it's the weaponizing of the police, the overspending on the police, which is outrageous, and the lack of accountability. I cannot imagine, we couldn't, because we have a multi-page code of ethics that holds us accountable. We do not have qualified immunity. I mean, there are some things that we are able to do if we make our best decision in the care and the protection of a child or an adult or a disabled person, that we cannot supposedly be sued. So that's our little bit of qualified immunity, as long as we're acting out of a place that is, this is my best educated decision about why I needed to do this. I don't know of a doctor that has qualified immunity. I don't go to a hospital where I don't know how many people died at that hospital. But yet we're not given that information about people who work for me. And I use that language deliberately. It's my tax dollars. You're not doing me a favor. You're getting paid handsomely to do this job. I would like to see people screened differently who go into this work who always feel so unsafe. Why are you doing this then? If this is so scary, you know, I would not send someone, I would talk to someone seriously if you were going to go out and say you're going to do home visits, but you're terrified. That is not a good mix, because it already sets you up for something to go wrong. We all know that. Anybody who's ever done a home visit, if you don't have some sense that I'm in control of me in all of this, you are a walking billboard in any community, be it rich or poor, for someone to do something to harass you or take advantage, because you're just emanating fear. So every time I hear I'm frightened, what does that mean? Then why are you in this gig? And I don't hear the same language with firemen who run into fire saying how frightened they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It blows my mind that you can be in that field and use the excuse of I fear for my life as a police officer. What happened? Where did we go wrong with that?
But what did you think the job was?
Jail free card. I'm sorry.
Right. But what did you think the job was? You made this is the job. No one forced you to take this job.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this coming from a family with police in it, and who I ask this question: why are you doing this? What is it that I come from a military family. I get service in that level, but I always have to ask my loved ones, why are you doing this? What is it that you're wanting to gain? It's like, why are you in the profession? What is it that you want? And for some, it's a lot of other things that the job isn't going to give them. I can tell there's so many stories behind why people want that kind of power and responsibility, that that's where we could come in, is to be part of screening and helping people to figure out who really should not be in this profession, in this job, because there are a lot of people who we could easily tell to someone, this is not a good fit.
The community organizing part is so key as well. Really, again, not making decisions without the people who are going to be affected by any changes, is reaching out to the community to find out what policing has looked like for them. And so there's also not going to be a one size fits all. We have some communities that have done better with with police officers being a part of the community, and some where that's a foreign language. You know, they're nowhere near that. And then also, you know, I've heard conversations about other people speaking for the communities, that all communities need to dismantle, and no community wants police officers. But there's been people going around doing interviews where some communities have said, yeah, we absolutely need and want police officers. That's not the problem. We want them to be trained. We want them to be respectful. We want to make sure they know us, and we want to make sure that they're not afraid at the mere appearance of us and are going to shoot us just because. And so I think there's just levels to that. Just the concept of, it has really touched me and hit me just watching society in the last few years, and really understanding this concept that the responses that we receive from police officers is really about a fear of Black people, that they've been taught that just by our mere existence, they fear us. So when you see a police officer with a gun and a stick and pepper spray and colleagues, and they're afraid of the boy who's walking with his hands in his pocket or with no weapons, how do you justify it? That's not fear of the situation. That's fear of the person because of the color of their skin. And that's another place where social workers can be instrumental in helping them think through that, and rethink how they're trained. You know, we've heard that they use Black faces for practicing to shoot. You know, so yeah, we have a lot of spaces where we can be instrumental, but I do think we have to do self in the process. And I mean self-care as a profession, that we're taking care of ourselves and each other as we think about how to proceed in this space.
I'll say that I worked, again, for years, not just primarily with substance use, but many of the individuals had co-occurring mental health issues. And I worked a lot with probation and the Department of Children's Services as far as, you know, giving reports and things like that. I did find it, sometimes for me, it was a conflict, but it was also an opportunity to for some case advocacy with regard to, you know, what was consented to in their consent form. I'm really glad that we're discussing this, and I think Gary, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things. One is that we also have to look at the feeder into the profession of policing. And again, it made me think, coming from military, lots of places where you go out post-military is into, you've been trained to do a certain thing. And in a volunteer army, there are numbers of people for whom that was a career path because nothing else fit. You know, it used to be you could go into the military without any other education. Now it's required that you have a high school education. You know, that's important, but it also, high school says you're going in at 18 and being trained with a young brain that already doesn't like rules, to be able to figure out what the rules are, and having power. If anybody wants to see that, go to Israel to look at what it means to watch an 18-year-old with a gun with power. And that's a very scary dynamic, having done work in Israel. But it also says that you have to wonder then, what is the training, depending upon where you're deployed, about who the enemy is and what they look like. And do you differentiate between my skin, and nor should you, and the skin of someone who is where you're in the Middle East and you just see dark skin? That's who's my enemy. And then that is supported by the narrative that you've been told your whole life, that Black is dangerous. Black is dangerous. As a clinician, I see that as projection and displacement, and that people are projecting onto us to control and this is very Freudian, their own internal stuff. It's always been sexualized. It's been, you can't, you know, we're lazy, oversexed, dangerous, this, that, and the other. Well, maybe if we stop listening to that piece and begin to say, you're telling me some interesting things about your inner workings here by all this projection, and taking the power back from that framing lens to say, that's who you are. You know, when people say, oh no, someone wants to take the power, that's what you would do if you were under this kind of stress. You would do that. And so you're managing for what you would do, not what we would do as a people. Try that as an interesting shift. It's an interesting shift to really think about, who are we training? Who are we hiring? Is this the time to give people points for having, I want to move people in the military, but is there work that we need to be doing as social workers to help decathect some of that trauma that goes on? What does it mean with people who already have trauma who go into the military to be further traumatized and then remain in communities where that trauma continues to play itself out? So I think there's a lot there that it doesn't mean I need to be in a patrol car with you, or so I think there's a lot of front end stuff we could do.
And we think about, you know, the history of police and how that was formed. There's just so many layers to it. But I do want to see us make this a priority amongst all the other priorities, and see us make some improvements, because we can't continue the way that we have. There was one other thing, just thinking about, I think I'm losing the thought about police officers, what they've been taught. Yeah, and I think another social work role is helping them to relearn the history that they've been taught about. You know, and it's kind of like what Gary, along those lines, been kind of sitting in this in my own personal space, that we've all been taught lies about who Black people are, whether it's ourselves. And it's little things I think about, whether we were told that our lips were big and that was not good, or that we're angry. And then I'm seeing things like, wow, we're not the angry ones. You know? But the same thing, there's a lot of projection that took place, or a lot of this is based on fear, because people do have a sense of our power and our beauty and all those different things, and what happens if they really let us, you know, be free, you know? So I think there's just so many different layers. But I think it's interesting. I think for all of us, re-educating ourselves and white people about the things that they've been taught about who we are. It's time for the truth. You know, we've all been educated in a way that was built on a lot of lies, whether I was taught in my classroom about our history, you know, what I know my friends were taught. So I'm in this space of relearning the things that I was taught about myself and things that other people were taught about me, and realizing that a lot of it just simply isn't true. And 2020, there's something about this 2020. We thought 2020 was going to be, oh, my vision is clear, best year ever, but it's our hardest year ever. But it is about vision. It's about the real truth coming out. And so we're all in this really amazing opportunity space where we get to really understand the truth and how that's going to take us forward and get rid of all the lies that we've been told. And the truth is coming out, whether we want it to or not, you know? So I think it's a powerful time.
Another lie, another way that we have been lied to, and lies that I have believed, is a science kind of lie. And you're going to think this example is silly, but I swear to you, it proves my inner racism that I have to learn to overcome. So I grew up eating white chicken eggs because that's what was available. And then in college, it was like cool to eat brown chicken eggs because they're more nutritious or something. And I have done this for raised my kids on brown chicken eggs. And a year ago, I'm shopping in the grocery store with my daughter who's in her 30s, and I'm picking up the brown chicken eggs, and she says, "Mom, you know there's no difference, right?" You know that they're brown because chickens have different colored feathers.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with their nutritional value.
Right.
And to link those, to think there's a correlation between the color of the skin and the quality of what's inside the skin, that's racist.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right?
No, great example.
Yeah, that's a great example. I love that.
Great example. I'm using it now.
I love that. I love it. Yeah. Especially because I myself go towards those brown eggs because of things I've just been taught. And it's like, I tell myself, don't do that. Like, if you want to get the brown egg, but don't get it thinking that they're better because they're brown, you know?
Yeah, it has
all the things that we've been taught.
We are not different genetically. We are not different.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I love that.
It's a great example.
Eye color, you know, we are not different.
Yeah.
So that's, I think something you said about the lies we were taught, Dawn, that made, you know, that scientific lie.
So it looks like we're getting close, approaching the end of our panel discussion. The last question is, and we've alluded to this at various points throughout the discussion already, but what are the benefits and costs of the social work profession taking a lead role in addressing racism? We could talk about for our profession, for our community members, for society in general.
I have a thought is the benefit is we will save ourselves. And I think that's the only reason to do this work, anti-racist work, is to save myself. That's why I do it. I'm not here to save others. Nobody I know needs saving. I'm here to save myself. Racism hurts me. It hurts all of us. It hurts me. And you know the quotation, you've seen this by Lilla Watson. She's an Indigenous woman. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together.
Wow.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
Who is that? I'm building my own.
Yeah, Lilla Watson. But if you just Google, if you have come here to help me, you will.
Right.
Okay.
And what's so interesting about that quote was that you sometimes will see it. Make sure you use it with her name, because it sometimes has been given to an Aboriginal woman. She's from Australia or New Zealand. And it's so interesting to see how before people push back on it, it was as if that was her identity. And people would say, well, what does that mean? So that you are a quote, would you ever see a quote that says a US woman is the quote, or an Indian woman? She has a name. Say her name and ascribe the quote to her. So that's where her name has emerged from. So recognizing and not owning other people's stuff, and understanding that it's not about altruism. This is because we will feel better. I will feel better. I feel better not being sexist because I can let go of some of the toxic masculinity. It's not because I just want everything. Okay, great. But I don't want to have to carry this crap around anymore, right? And with racism, the opportunity, the cost, I think one of the costs will be, there will be people, and as Dawn had said, we are not unanimous in this as a profession. We are not. And you can just go back and look at the statements that have been made by different professional organizations, to look at the ones that wouldn't say Black Lives Matter or anti-Blackness or anti-racist, who waffled because they're trying to serve too many people versus serving the right thing and doing the right thing. So that we may lose people, but I'd rather lose people doing the right thing than have them stay with me for doing nothing of the wrong thing. So let them go. It's time to stand up and do something. Let them go.
Yes.
Let them go.
I agree. We will lose them, and I say gladly, and
Goodbye. Don't let the door hit you.
There's no place for that in social work. And so that probably is one of the costs, that we will lose people. Yeah, but it's okay. The benefit will really outweigh that. And I really like Carol and both Gary sharing that it's really about the individual, what we individually will get out of it. The reality is, if we get this together, we get it right, we will create a better society. Imagine that it goes way bigger than us. And we have to think about it even globally. If we all do our piece, do our part, and are successful, have any level of success, it will all result in a better society. And that's ultimately what we're all after. And so, yeah.
I hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
So do I, Carol. So do I.
So do I.
Because one of the costs is that we white women will lose our status as white saviors. Ooh, now, I think that's a cost worth paying, but we got to recognize that. Get a little bit of power.
I love that. Yes.
That's deep.
I'd say one of the advantages of us taking a lead role in addressing this is that one of the questions that we asked earlier. I came to social work rather than psychology because I really like to focus on the social environment, because a lot of times when I bring up issues of race or other people bring up issues of race, they make internal attributions, like I believe Gary may have been talking about earlier, but they kind of ignore all the contributions from the social environment. So I think that if we do take a lead role moving forward, we will have, we will recruit more Black social workers, more Black faculty, and to some extent, but not totally, that will address some of our issues, not all, but just, I think, more racial and, you know, more getting more Black men as well.
I think there's a lot of possibility.
Absolutely. As far, yeah, and as far as cons, I really just kind of reiterate what you all stated. That yeah, so I think that is in effect an advantage too, that we kind of draw a clear line about what the profession is, and then we get the right people, and you know, we screen out the people that may not necessarily be the best fit for the profession or the clients we serve.
Yeah. I like Carol's feedback in terms of cost, because it's just, I was trying to think of the cost from the perspective of, from my own perspective as Black women and even as people of color, is that the other cost is that it also forces us to look at ourselves, own our power, and then show up, because ultimately, you know, we will be put in the situations where we'll have to look at ourselves, we'll have to embrace who we are, and we'll have to show up in a different way. And that's scary. It's empowering and it's powerful, and that's what we need. But I think sometimes there's been a comfort in hiding, and or the excuse, not even excuses, just hiding in a space of, we can't do these things because we haven't been given an opportunity, or, you know, those kind of things. So it'll force us to look at ourselves as well, and step into our greatness, you know, without any excuses for why we can't. So I think it's really a deep question. It can be a deep question, so I appreciate that. But what does it mean for us? What is the cost for us individually?
The cost of complicity, it just creates another closet in which to put yourself in. And we know from the data the cost of being in the closet. You come out when you're ready, but there is a consequence and a cost the race closet is a big one. And it's intersectional. So all of these interlocking closets. So it's like those dolls that you take one out and there's another one, there's another one, and there's another one. And I'd say you keep unpacking all of those dolls, and at the very core is racism and anti-Blackness, because that's really what we're not talking about. Racism doesn't name it, it's anti-Blackness. That's what we're talking about. It's anti-Blackness, and it is a phenomena. And we need to be able to name it. In order to fix it, you have to name it. And it's not pretty, but it is anti-Blackness.
Well, we are pretty much near or at the end of our panel discussion. Does anybody have any closing remarks that they like to make? I'll go ahead and I'll start. This, I was looking forward to this. I knew most people prior to coming, so it exceeded my expectations. So I can just say I, for one, really appreciated this panel discussion. I hope everybody else appreciates it as much as. And what I plan to do moving forward is I plan to start off like with some pedagogical changes, like what we and Gary and Don talked about earlier. I plan on doing more research on cultural trauma, and also just kind of monitoring myself and just, you know, kind of seeing, am I really living up to my potential as a social worker, as an educator, with regard to Black people.
So I remind myself all the time that, you know, what Kendi said, that the concept of race was invented in 1453 by slave traders who wanted to justify and glorify their use of other people's labor so they could get rich. That's it. And then everything has been built on that. So I want to think every day of the daily choices I make that maybe abuse somebody else's labor. And I want to look at the macro structural, like increasing minimum wage, things that we can work on so we can leave this place better than we found it.
Unpack capitalism. That's the problem.
It is. It
It's the
is.
capital.
Yeah,
It's the
capitalism.
capitalist
Yeah.
system, and we have to work towards liberation. If we don't move towards liberation, that doesn't mean flattening it for everything, but this system is an economic system, as Carol just pointed out. So fight the power.
Yeah. Yeah, and this has been such a wonderful opportunity. I think for me, this is about, the thing I enjoy most from this conversation is the diversity of the conversation. I'm committing myself to constantly putting myself in places where I'm a part of, and I really love changing safe conversations to brave conversations. Because it's important for me to understand, it's my personality and also my role, other perspectives, and I want to see how other people are growing and what does that mean for all of us. And I love hearing Gary's experience. I love hearing Carol's experience and perspective. And I think we have to talk to people who don't look like us more to have a better understanding of where we need to go, where people are and where we need to go. So I think it's important to do a lot of different conversations with people that don't look like you, those uncomfortable conversations, people that do look like you, with the future, people who are a part of the future. So just a lot of, and not for the sake of having conversation, but for the sake of learning from each other. So that's where I am right now. And I'm also, again, building my library. I have to learn. Recently I was like, why don't I know these things? And someone reminded me, you weren't taught those things. So one, give yourself a break, Particularly I did attend Howard University where I was taught a lot, but really like taking every opportunity that I can to educate myself more, and then to engage in conversation for now. And then once I'm finished sitting there and I feel like I've had enough, it's trying to figure out what do I do with all of those conversations and knowledge so that I can impact change. So that's where I am.
All right. Well, I guess we'll call it a day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Virgil, for
We appreciate it.
facilitating. Thank you
Oh,
so
no
much.
problem. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you.
guys.
It was
Thank
great.
you.